November 19th, 1941. The sun over Cyrenaica burns white, flattening every shadow. The desert wind carries grit that clings to goggles and seeps between teeth. Inside his new American-built M3 Stuart, Lieutenant Harold H. Smith of the Royal Tank Regiment squints through a narrow periscope slit, seeing nothing but waves of ochre sand rippling toward the Libyan horizon. The temperature inside the tank nears 130 degrees Fahrenheit. The men call it the oven. Oil pressure's steady, Corporal Peters mutters, tapping a gauge with a gloved finger. The radial engine's whine fills the hull a high, steady buzz, unlike the deeper growl of the British Crusaders idling nearby. To the untrained ear, the M3 sounds almost playful, like a toy. Its small, riveted turret, short-barreled 37mm gun, and pint-sized silhouette have earned it a nickname whispered even by its crews, the Honey. Quick, sweet, and fragile. But Smith knows the day's orders leave no room for sweetness. Operation Crusader has begun. The British 8th Army's 7th Armored Division, the famed Desert Rats, is pushing against General Erwin Rommel's Afrika Corps to relieve the besieged garrison at Tobruk. Smith's troop, part of the newly arrived 4th Royal Tank Regiment, equipped with American M3s, has been assigned to flank reconnaissance near Bir el Gubi. The task probe Italian Ariete Division positions, exploit gaps, and report enemy armor strength. At 0630, engines roar across the plain. Columns of dust rise like storm fronts as squadrons of Stuarts fan out, 14 tons of riveted steel sprinting across open ground at nearly 40 miles per hour. The desert floor shudders under hundreds of spinning tracks. Overhead, the sky is a sheet of hard blue. "Keep it tight, boys," Smith radios through his throat mic. "Stay off the skyline." Repeat, "Stay low." They crest a low ridge and the view explodes, distant flashes, plumes of smoke and the black silhouettes of enemy armor. Panzer IIIs and IVs, gray-green hulls glinting in the heat haze, arrayed in a staggered line north of a shallow wadi. Smith can almost feel the arrogance radiating from that formation. Rommel's veterans have been fighting in the desert for a year. They've already sent British Crusaders and Matildas burning into the sand. To them, these new American toys, light, fast, thin-skinned, must look like comic relief. Target bearing 150, range 800, Peters shouts. Smith traverses the turret. The M23 sight flickers. The 37mm M6 gun spits flame, its recoil a sharp kick through the floor plates. The shell slams into the flank of a Panzer II at mid-range, punching clean through. The German light tank jerks sideways, smoke belching from the rear deck. "One down." "Good hit," someone cheers over the net. But return fire answers instantly, high-velocity 50mm rounds shrieking overhead, kicking up fountains of sand. The Stuart's armor, an inch at best on the front, is no match if a shell connects. Smith orders evasive movement. Hard left, full power. The driver yanks the levers and the little tank darts aside like a startled animal, sand spraying from its tracks. Speed, not armor, is life. From higher ground, the German commander, Major Walter Naring's forward battalion, misjudges the sight. Through binoculars, the M3s seem flimsy, almost comical. Reports to Division HQ later will describe American toy tanks of little combat value. But the Stuarts are already exploiting the desert's one great truth: mobility. Their radial Continental W670 engines may scream, but they run clean. Their suspensions eat rough ground. And unlike the ponderous British infantry tanks, they can pivot, sprint, and vanish before a countershot finds them. By 0745, the skirmish around Bir el Gubi has turned chaotic. Dust columns intertwine, visibility drops to yards. Smith's troop swings wide through a defile emerging on the Germans' open flank. He glimpses a supply truck convoy, fuel drums, and ammunition stacked high. A perfect soft target. Load AP, then he. We're going for their tail. Rounds thud from the 37mm barrel. The first shell pierces a truck's side, detonating its load. A tower of flame rolls skyward. Secondary explosions ripple across the column. Over the radio net, German chatter erupts, panicked, disjointed. The M3s dash in and out like jackals firing and withdrawing before heavier guns can pivot. This is what the designers in Detroit had envisioned: a cavalry tank, fast enough to scout, vicious enough to exploit confusion. Inside the tank, the crew fights heat more than fear. Sweat blinds, engine fumes choke, and every rivet burns to the touch. But exhilaration drives them forward. Feels like a bloody race, Peters laughs. Smith just grins. If we keep them guessing, that's half the fight. Across the battlefield, Italian M13 Porsche 40s lurch into motion, their diesel engines coughing black smoke. The Ariete division, dug in behind minefields, throws everything forward to stem the breach. Machine gun tracers rake the sand. One Stuart takes a direct hit. The thin hull splits, fuel igniting in a blinding flash. A crewman scrambles out, uniform aflame, before collapsing. The sight cuts through the euphoria like a knife. Smith's voice tightens. All tanks break contact, rendezvous point red, now. They pull back under smoke cover, zigzagging through shell bursts. The M3's suspension groans, shocks compressing as it bounces over the Wadi lip. Behind them, British 25-pounders begin pounding the Italian lines, dull concussions rolling through the desert. The smell of cordite and burning petrol mixes with dust until the air itself feels heavy. By midday, the Stuart crews regroup behind a dune line. Mechanics in greasy overalls rush forward with jerry cans and coolant tins. Engines hiss as radiators vent steam. Smith climbs out, his khaki coveralls soaked dark. He takes a long pull from his canteen, then looks back toward the smoke-smeared horizon. They'd lost 2 tanks, 3 men. But they'd also knocked out half a dozen enemy vehicles and set Rommel's flank ablaze. For a first action, it was a statement. Far to the west, at Panzergruppe Afrika headquarters, intercepts of British radio traffic confirmed the identity of the new tank, an American light model M3. Rommel frowns over the report. Fast, yes. But fragile, he says curtly. Still, the Desert Fox makes a note in his margin: watch for these. They move like cavalry. Evening drapes the desert in amber. Smith sits atop his Stuart's turret, listening to the tick-tick-tick of cooling metal. The engine smell lingers, mingled with cordite and victory. He thinks of the engineers across the Atlantic, men who built this machine not for glory, but for necessity. In their workshops, the idea of a toy tank might have seemed an insult. Here, under the Libyan stars, it feels more like a prophecy. Tomorrow, they'll push deeper toward Tobruk. The Americans will send more M3s, and the British will learn how to fight with speed instead of weight. The desert, for all its cruelty, has a way of teaching fast learners. In the stillness, a faint radio call crackles through static. 8th Army to forward elements, good show today. Hold positions, prepare for night patrols. Smith exhales, wiping grit from his face. The horizon glows faintly where wrecks still burn. War, he realizes, smells of metal fuel and sand, and of something else: vindication waiting to be earned. He looks down at the battered little Stuart and smiles. Maybe a toy. But a toy with teeth. November-December 1941. Cyrenaica. By dawn the next day, the sand around Bir el Gubi has turned into a graveyard of burnt steel. Wrecked Panzer IIIs lie half buried in the dunes, their turrets scorched and twisted like molten crowns. The desert wind hums through holes torn by 37mm shells, carrying a metallic echo that sounds eerily like mourning. Lieutenant Harold H. Smith of the 4th Royal Tank Regiment stands beside his Stuart, binoculars pressed against his dust-streaked face, scanning the silent horizon. Corporal Peters, his gunner, lights a cigarette, the flame cupped carefully in both hands. "Looks like we gave the fox something to chew on," he says. Smith lowers the glasses and exhales. "He'll chew back harder," he replies. They both know what's coming. Erwin Rommel never lets a flank bleed without striking back. 200 kilometers to the west, at Panzergruppe Afrika headquarters, near Agadarbiya, the Desert Fox studies a map flecked with sand. Around him, the air is thick with petrol fumes and tension. Oberst Nering stands rigid, pointer in hand. Reports confirm new American tanks, Herr General, small, fast, light armor. The British call them honeys. Rommel's sharp blue eyes narrow. Fast, yes, he murmurs, pacing, but thin-skinned. They'll die quickly enough. Then he pauses, tapping the map. Still underestimate nothing. Even a mosquito can sting. His officers glance at one another. They know that tone. Rommel's instincts are rarely wrong. Fuel is running low. The supply convoys from Tripoli are under constant Royal Navy attack. But he refuses to wait. We strike before they catch their breath, he orders. If they wish to race, we will show them the cost of speed. 3 days later, the British 7th Armored Division rolls westward again under a blazing noon sun. Operation Crusader is grinding forward, and the American-built M3s lead the push towards Sidi Rezegh. Their engines roar in unison, the sound more like aircraft than tanks, a high radial whine that bounces across the desert floor. Inside Smith's Stuart, the heat is suffocating. The air smells of oil cordite and human sweat. He wipes his goggles and checks his dial's oil pressure, steady engine temperature climbing. Red 2 Titan formation, he calls into the throat mic. We're bunching up. A reply crackles back through static. Copy that, Red 1. Ahead, shimmering through the heat haze, lies a ridge marked on the maps as Point 175 high ground, commanding the road to Tobruk. Reconnaissance reports enemy armor entrenching there, likely elements of the 15th Panzer Division. Smith knows what that means. Rommel's trap is set. Looks like the fox is waiting, he mutters. Then let's make him wait too long, Peters replies, slamming a shell into the breach. At 09:30, the first German shells streak in from over a kilometer away. They whistle past with a sound like ripping canvas. One Stuart takes a direct hit. The explosion lifts the turret clear from the hull in a fireball that turns the sand black. Red 3's gone. Someone shouts over the net. Smith orders evasive movement. Take the ridge, use the folds. The Stuarts dart like insects, weaving through shallow depressions. The air fills with smoke and dust, turning the world into a swirling fog. Smith's tank halts on a small rise. He spots a Panzer III broadside through the periscope. On the mark, he says calmly. Peters fires. The first 37mm shot glances off the second, penetrates just above the engine deck. A bloom of smoke. The German crew bails out, hands high, running into the wind. Peters whoops. That's one for the toy tank. But Smith isn't smiling. He's counting how long until the Germans regroup. Miles away, Rommel's counterthrust is already underway. Kampfgruppe Stefan, a mixed formation of Panzer's armored cars and motorized infantry, is sweeping east to outflank the British columns. Strike fast, break their flank, drive them into their own artillery, Rommel radios. His men obey with precision. From behind low dunes, the long barrels of 88mm guns rise like predators. When the British Stuarts cross open ground near Sidi Rezegh, the guns roar. The shells cut through the desert air at supersonic speed, striking with terrifying accuracy. In seconds, the light tanks vanish in plumes of fire. Red 1 to all units, break contact. Fall back to grid. E7. Smith's voice tears through the radio. The remaining Stuarts pivot hard, their engines screaming as they retreat under fire. Dust blinds the gunners. Explosions bloom behind them. One Panzer shell rips through the rear of Red 4, setting its fuel alight. Smith watches the burning tank lurch to a halt, the crew scrambling free before a final blast engulfs them. He clenches his jaw, forcing himself to look forward. Keep moving, he shouts. Don't stop for anything. By nightfall, the ridge is a wasteland of wrecks and silence. The regiment has lost more than half its strength. Mechanics work under flickering lanterns, stripping usable parts from destroyed hulls. The survivors sit on the sand beside their tanks, faces blackened, eyes hollow. Smith writes in his small notebook under the dim glow of a flashlight. Not just casualty figures, but what he's learned. Speed saves lives, but not in a stand-up fight. We must use it differently. Hunt, not duel. The Stuart's gift, he realizes, isn't armor or firepower. It's movement. Treat it like cavalry, and it can sting the desert fox's tail. Treat it like a battle tank, and it dies. Across the lines, Rommel studies captured documents from the wrecks. He turns an American technical manual over in his hands, amused by the simple engineering. Basic but clever, he murmurs. Fast to build, easy to drive. He looks to Naring. They'll flood the desert with these. We'll destroy one column and two more will appear. They build them like the English build tea kettles, endless. He tosses the manual aside and lights a cigarette. Still, even kettles can boil if the fire grows hot enough. And that night, the wind rises, moaning through the camp like a restless ghost. The men of the 4th Royal Tank Regiment sleep in their coveralls, sprawled beside the idling Stuarts for warmth. The engines tick as they cool, echoing in the vast silence. Somewhere in the distance, a fuel dump burns a single orange glow under the stars. Smith lies awake on his bedroll, listening to faint radio chatter and the far-off rumble of artillery. He thinks of Detroit, of the factory workers who built these machines by the thousand, and wonders if they imagined this, the sand, the heat, the endless horizon. Maybe we're the experiment, he whispers into the dark. Peters stirs beside him, half asleep. If we are, he mutters, let's make sure it's a good one. Smith smiles faintly. He closes his eyes, letting the desert wind carry away the smell of fuel and smoke. Tomorrow they'll roll again, because that's what the new doctrine demands, constant movement, constant pressure. The toy tank has teeth now, and somewhere beyond the dunes, Rommel is beginning to believe it. January 1942. Gazala line. The desert wind shifts with the new year colder, now carrying the sting of January nights. In the lee of a low ridge near Gazala, Lieutenant Harold H. Smith wakes before dawn, the horizon still black. The hum of generators and the cough of idling engines mix with the smell of hot oil and dust. The men move quietly, no shouts, no bravado, just the practiced rhythm of soldiers who have learned that noise draws artillery. The Stuart tank beside him gleams faintly in the moonlight, sand polished to a dull sheen. The once bright American olive drab is nearly gone, scoured off by months of grit and wind. On its turret, a crude white 4RTR marking blurs with dust. The little tank looks weary, as if it too knows that the war here never truly stops. Smith sips black tea from a battered canteen cup. Orders came through, Peters says, tightening his scarf. Recon push east along the Tri-Capuzzo. We're to test the enemy line. Rommel's men again. Who else since December the front around Gazala has settled into a tense stalemate? British and Commonwealth forces, holding a tenuous defensive arc west of Tobruk, while Rommel's Afrika Corps watches from just beyond the dunes, regrouping after the bruising weeks of Operation Crusader. Both sides lick their wounds, repair their tanks, and wait for supply convoys. But the desert never truly sleeps. Patrols clash nightly in the empty spaces between minefields. At first light, the Stuarts fan out across the plain. Their Continental engines whine to life, the sound slicing the still air. The sand here is firmer, streaked with pale rock that gives the tracks better bite. Smith leads the column, goggles fogging in the chill wind. His crew, Peters on the gun driver. Wallace crouched low in the seat, Loader Mason half awake beside the radio, move with the efficiency of habit. Keep spacing tight, Smith radios. Watch the ridgeline ahead. Through the periscope, the world rolls by in endless waves of tan. Here and there, the black skeleton of a wrecked truck juts from the sand. Yesterday's war still visible beneath the morning calm. 10 minutes later, the stillness breaks. A glint of glass on the horizon, a flash of sunlight, then the unmistakable crack of an 88. The shell lands wide but close enough to rattle the hull. Contact front range. Uncertain, looks like an ambush, Peters shouts. Smoke, hard right go. The Stuart pivots, treads, screaming. Wallace slams the throttle, and the little tank leaps sideways into a shallow depression. More shells follow, each one gouging fountains of sand. They can't trade blows here, not against concealed guns. Smith's only advantage is motion. He grabs the mic. Blue section hook south, draw them out, we'll flank. The Stuarts scatter like startled birds, each tank a plume of dust racing over the hardpan. The German gunners adjust, but the targets move too fast. Within minutes, Smith's troop circles wide, cresting a ridge that exposes the enemy line from the side. Through the periscope, he spots them, 3 88mm guns dug into low pits, barrels still swinging toward the empty front. Range 600, he says. AP loaded fire. The 37mm shell screams downrange. It hits the nearest gun's ammunition pile. The explosion is instant blinding. Flame engulfs the pit, scattering German crewmen. The second shot clips the towing truck, setting its engine ablaze. The other two guns pivot wildly, searching for the attackers now behind them. Keep moving, don't give them a target, Smith orders. The Stuarts dart in and out, firing short bursts, then disappearing into the folds of sand. Within 5 minutes, the ambush site is wrecked, one gun destroyed, the others abandoned. When the dust settles, the troop halts behind cover. Peters leans back, sweat streaming despite the cold air. We're learning, sir, he says between breaths. Finally learning how to use these little beasts. Smith nods. Not bad for toys, eh? The radio crackles headquarters, confirming successful contact, ordering withdrawal before Luftwaffe reconnaissance arrives. The British have begun to adapt, not just in tactics, but in doctrine. What started as desperation in 1941 is becoming a new style of war: fast raids, hit-and-run speed as armor. The Stuart's light frame, once mocked, fits the desert like a glove. As the column returns toward the Gazala line, the sun climbs higher, burning off the morning chill. The sand turns white-hot again. Along the way, they pass convoys of Bedford trucks hauling jerrycans, Matildas under repair, and a long line of captured Italian prisoners marching east under guard. The men stare at the small American tanks rolling past. Some smile, others scowl, but all seem surprised these toys are still alive. Back at camp, the mechanics swarm over the returning Stuarts. Sand pours from every hinge and vent. Crews stretch in the shade of camouflage nets, helmets off, faces red. Peters tosses his goggles aside. They'll start calling us the Honey Riders soon, he jokes. Smith chuckles but says nothing. He knows reputation is fragile. One good fight can be forgotten in a single bad hour. Still, today's patrol proved something. The M3 isn't just surviving, it's shaping the fight. That night, under a sky powdered with stars, the officers gather around a folding table lit by hurricane lamps. Maps ripple in the wind. Intelligence from intercepted German messages confirms that Rommel has shifted his attention north, probing the British defenses near Gazala. He's regrouping faster than we expected, says Colonel Gatehouse. But he's also wary. Our light armor raids have made him cautious. Cautious, Smith repeats softly. That's a first. Gatehouse glances up. Enjoy it while it lasts, Lieutenant. The Fox doesn't hesitate twice. Far to the west, in his own tent, Rommel studies aerial photos of British positions. His staff officer lays out a reconnaissance report. More of those American light tanks, sir. They hit the artillery at dawn, destroyed 2 guns, vanished again. Rommel's face tightens. They're learning, he says simply. We'll have to teach them faster. He circles a point on the map near Gazala. Here. When we move, they'll be waiting, so we'll make them come to us. Back in the British camp, the men settle into silence. Radios crackle, engines cool, and the desert wind hums softly over the dunes. Smith sits on his turret, looking east toward Tobruk, where faint flashes mark the night bombardment. The smell of fuel and dust clings to his clothes. He knows that sooner or later the fox will strike again, and when he does, the little Stuarts will be the first to meet him. In the dark, Peter's voice drifts up from below. "You think he's scared of us yet, sir?" Smith smiles faintly. "Not scared," he says, but he's looking over his shoulder. The lieutenant watches a shooting star streak across the horizon, then vanish into blackness. The desert swallows all traces of movement. But somewhere beneath that silence, the war is changing, and the toy tank is beginning to write its own legend. February 1942. Knightsbridge. The desert before dawn feels almost gentle, cool air, distant stars, and the low growl of engines warming under tarpaulins. But the men of the 4th Royal Tank Regiment know better. In North Africa, peace is only the breath you take before the next storm. Lieutenant Harold H. Smith stands beside his M3 Stuart, rubbing grit from his eyes, the pale light outlining the angular shape of the tank. It's February 1942. The British 8th Army holds a tenuous defensive line stretching from Gazala south to Bir Hakeim. The press calls it the Gazala line, but the men call it a sandcastle, fragile, shifting, never complete. They've dug tank pits, laid minefields, and built crude strongpoints with names that sound almost British in their cheerfulness. Knightsbridge, El Adam Akroma. For now, Rommel is quiet, reorganizing after his December retreat. The calm feels unnatural, a pause drawn tight as wire. At 0500, the order comes a mobile reconnaissance sweep east of Knightsbridge. Intelligence reports German armor probing along the southern approaches, likely a small force. Smith's troop is tasked to investigate, not to engage, just to see and report. But in the desert, plans rarely survive first contact. Engines flare to life, coughing smoke into the cold air. The Stuarts roll out in column headlights off compasses fixed to a bearing east by southeast. The horizon glows faintly violet, the first edge of dawn. Smith rides with one arm resting on the turret rim, scanning the vast emptiness. The desert looks peaceful until it doesn't. An hour later, they crest a ridge and freeze. Below them, in a shallow depression, sit the silhouettes of German tanks, not a small patrol, but a full Kampfgruppe of panzers lined up like statues in the morning haze. Smith's throat tightens. Christ, they're massing for something big. Peters squints through binoculars. Dozens of them, sir. Mark III's and IVs may be a company's worth. Looks like refueling. Smith doesn't hesitate. We can't fight that. Radio it in priority. Before Peters can key the mic, a glint flashes below. Then the sharp bark of an 88 splits the air. The first shell misses, exploding behind them in a cloud of sand. The second lands closer, showering the Stuart with stones. Move reverse over the crest, Smith yells. Wallace slams the levers. The tank lurches backward, tracks biting deep. More shells follow, chasing them up the slope. Over the radio comes chaos, other crews calling contacts, some already hit. They reach the far side and dive into a wadi dust, filling every breath. Smith checks his map. We're cut off from the others, only one way back through that low ground to the west. The Stuarts form up 3 left from 5. Engines scream as they bolt across the basin, zigzagging through scrub. The Germans, realizing they're running, give chase. Panzer silhouettes appear on the ridge gun flashes, stabbing the morning sky. The race begins. At 40 miles per hour, the M3's radial engine wails like a siren. The crew can feel every bump in their spines. Peters grips the gun breech, waiting for a shot to line up. 2 on our tail, 800 yards. Don't stop, Smith shouts. Keep her straight. A round slams into the sand beside them, peppering the hull with fragments. Another whistles overhead. The Germans are closing. Then Peters yells, "Now," and fires. The 37mm shell hits the lead panzer's track. It shears off the tank, veering sideways in a cloud of dust. The second panzer slows to avoid the wreck, buying precious seconds. Good shot. Keep her flat out. They reach British lines an hour later, engines smoking, uniforms soaked with sweat. Behind them, German shells fall short. The radio crackles with acknowledgement. Contact report received confirming major enemy buildup east of Knightsbridge. Within hours, 8th Army intelligence is buzzing. Rommel is preparing something. That night, under the weak glow of kerosene lamps, Smith sits with a mug of lukewarm tea and stares at his map. The pattern is clear: German armor concentrating in the south, supply trucks moving at night, signals, intercepts spiking. The Fox is readying another lunge. Colonel Gatehouse enters the tent, dust on his boots, expression grim. Good work today. You found his spear point. Feels like we barely escaped it, Smith replies. That's reconnaissance, Lieutenant. You don't need to win, just survive long enough to warn us. Gatehouse leans over the map. HQ thinks he'll strike between Bir Hakeim and the coast. Fast thrust north, classic Rommel. Your report confirms he's moving armor early. Smith nods slowly. Then the toy tanks did their job. Gatehouse allows a thin smile. Aye. The Americans may have built toys, but they're the reason we'll have warning. Outside, the desert wind rises, lifting sand like smoke. The night feels charged, electric, the calm before something immense. Across the line, Rommel studies his own maps under lantern light. His staff officers hover close, pointing at British positions marked in red grease pencil. They've spotted our preparations, one warns. Rommel exhales a plume of cigarette smoke. Let them. They know we're coming. They just don't know when. He taps a date on the calendar, late May. By then, our new Mark IIIs will be ready, and the supply columns will be full again. We'll break them at Gazala, and the road to Tobruk will open. But until then, the reconnaissance war continues, small duels in the sand, tank versus tank, ghost against ghost. For Smith and his crew, each day becomes a lesson in survival, each mile a test of nerves. They learn to move by instinct, to read the faint patterns of wind and shadow that might conceal an ambush. They learn to trust speed over courage, calculation over glory. Weeks pass. The desert shifts from cool dawns to furnace days. The Stuarts keep running, scouting, raiding, never resting. Mechanics replace engines in open sunlight, hands blistered from heat. Pilots of the Desert Air Force fly cover, dipping wings in salute. The camaraderie between air and ground grows strong. In this wide emptiness, they rely on each other utterly. On February 27th at twilight, Smith's troop returns from another long-range patrol. The sun bleeds red behind the dunes, painting everything in copper light. As they enter camp, a burst of laughter greets them, fresh mail from home. Peters opens a letter, grinning at a child's drawing of a tank labeled Daddy's Honey. He pins it inside the turret beside a tally of confirmed kills. Smith watches quiet. The drawing, simple and bright, feels like a promise that somewhere beyond the sand and steel life continues. He thinks of the men who won't see theirs again and murmurs, "Let's make this one count." In the distance, artillery flashes flicker faintly. The war hasn't paused. It's only drawing breath. Soon, Rommel's storm will break again, and when it does, the little American tanks, the toys, will be waiting at the front of the line. May 26, 1942. The Gazala offensive. The morning sky over the Libyan desert is so pale it looks bleached. It's May 26, 1942, the day Erwin Rommel makes his move. For months, the Afrika Korps has gathered strength in silence, hidden by sandstorms and deception. Now, as dawn stretches over the Gazala line, hundreds of engines ignite across a 50-mile front. The sound rolls across the desert like a rising storm. At British headquarters near Knightsbridge, messages pour in, coded, frantic, half-finished. Enemy armor on the move south of Bir Hakeim. Dust columns 10 miles long, multiple units advancing in hook formation. It's the old trick, Rommel's signature, the wide left hook striking around the southern flank before the British can pivot to face him. In the 4th Royal Tank Regiment, Bivouac Lieutenant Harold H. Smith is already in the turret when the call comes. All units to action stations. Confirm enemy advance. He shouts to his crew, voice rising over the roar of engines. Peters load ape. Wallace bring us about, the Stuart shudders, exhaust fumes spilling into the dawn air. They crest a low dune and see at the horizon alive with movement. Long columns of German panzers roll in tight formation, dust billowing behind them. Trucks, half-tracks, field guns, the whole weight of the Afrika Korps sweeping around the flank. The Fox is back. Sweet Mother of God, Peters mutters. That's half of Germany. Smith doesn't answer. He knows they're outnumbered. But orders are orders. Red section, advance to contact. Delay them. Buy time for brigade to reposition. The Stuarts surge forward, kicking up trails of dust that blur into the horizon. The little tanks dart across the open ground, their speed, their only defense. Artillery flashes from the German lines, the first salvos of a campaign that will decide the Desert War. The shells fall close. One explodes ahead, sending a shockwave through the hull. The crew's ears ring, but they keep moving. Smith grips the turret handles as the tank bounces violently. Hold her steady. Find cover. Through the periscope, he spots a cluster of Panzer IIIs maneuvering to intercept. He traverses, fires. The 37mm shell hits one square in the track, spinning it sideways. Peters loads again, faster, now hands slick with sweat. Another shot, another plume of smoke. But return fire is immediate. The Germans are disciplined, their gunnery precise. An armor-piercing round slams into the Stuart's right side, tearing through a stowage box, but not penetrating. Wallace curses, steering sharply left. We're lucky today, don't depend on luck, Smith snaps. Keep moving. Radio chatter fills the air, snippets of fear, confusion, command. Enemy breakthrough, near El Adem. We're cut off, request air support. The line dissolves in static. Overhead, the sun climbs, turning the battlefield into a furnace. By midday, the entire southern flank is in motion. The British 7th Armored Brigade fights a running battle, outnumbered 2-1. The Stuarts dash between ridges, firing, retreating, then striking again. Dust and smoke erase direction. Even compasses become useless. Rommel, watching from a command half-track, studies the chaos through field glasses. There, he says, pointing, the light tanks, American models. They're fast, but too eager. Tell our flanking guns to hold their fire until they close. His artillery officers obey. When the Stuarts charge again, the 88s open up in perfect unison. The first volley shreds the lead troop. Flames leap skyward. Smith's heart clenches. Friends he'd eaten breakfast with minutes ago vanish in fire. Hard right. Get us behind the ridge, he orders. The Stuart careens down a slope, tracks churning sand. They stop in a shallow depression, panting, deafened. Peters reloads without thinking, muscle memory replacing fear. Through the dust, Smith glimpses a burning tank. A man climbs from the hatch, uniform aflame, running only a few yards before collapsing. The lieutenant forces himself not to look away. We hold this ground, he says quietly. We hold until they pull back. He keys the mic. Red section regroup at coordinate Delta 9. Use smoke, then withdraw north. A wall of white smoke blooms across the desert, as the remaining Stuarts reverse engines, howling. Behind them, the German advance rolls on a tidal wave of steel and dust. By late afternoon, the regiment is shattered. Of the 20 tanks that began the day, fewer than half remain operational. The survivors fall back toward Knightsbridge, joining the rearguard of Crusaders and Grants holding the crossroads. The air reeks of burning oil and cordite. Smith parks his Stuart beside a wrecked truck and climbs out, legs trembling. Mechanics swarm to refuel, rearm, patch bullet holes. The heat is suffocating. Peters sits on the turret helmet, off hair matted with grime. Sir, he says softly, how do we stop that? Smith wipes his face, eyes stinging. We don't. Not here. We slow him down. That's all we can do. Across the plain, the thunder of guns never stops. The Gazala line is cracking. Not broken yet, but bending under the weight of Rommel's attack. British dispatch riders tear through the dust carrying frantic messages to headquarters. Orders change by the hour. The map itself seems to shift with every radio call. That night, under a canopy of smoke and stars, Smith's troop digs in near a supply depot north of Knightsbridge. The horizon glows orange where the fighting continues. He listens to the rumble of engines, the distant stutter of machine guns. Every sound feels closer than it should. In Rommel's camp, celebration begins early. The enemy withdraws and aid reports. We have their flank. The Desert Fox nods but doesn't smile. He knows this kind of victory breeds overconfidence, and the British, once cornered, fight hardest. At dawn, reconnaissance planes spot more dust rising from the west. Reinforcements moving in. Among them fresh American tanks from the 2nd Armored Division, new M3s, their paint still clean, their crews eager. They'll reach the line within days. The toy tank isn't finished yet. Smith watches the eastern sky, pale to gray exhaustion sinking into his bones. Around him, men sleep where they fell. The desert hums quietly, almost peaceful again. He runs a hand over the dented hull of his tank, scarred but alive. Still here, he murmurs. Peter's half awake inside the turret, grins weakly. Yeah, still biting. Neither of them knows how long they'll hold, only that when the sun rises, they'll drive out again, into the furnace to buy one more hour for the men behind them. Because sometimes that's how legends are made, not by winning, but by refusing to die. May 27, 1942. Knightsbridge Crossroads. The desert sun rises blood-red over the western Libyan plain, catching the smoke of burning fuel and shattered steel. The air itself shimmers with heat and violence. Around the crossroads, code-named Knightsbridge, the ground trembles beneath the weight of tank treads. What began yesterday as a flanking thrust has become a full storm, the Gazala offensive in its fury. Lieutenant Harold H. Smith has barely slept. His Stuart sits at the edge of a shallow depression, one of the few still running. Mechanics have welded a new track plate where a shell gouged the hull. The paint still smells scorched. Peters leans against the turret, smoking a rationed cigarette, eyes hollow. HQ says Rommel's pushing north fast, he mutters. We're to hold this junction until the Grants get in position. Smith nods without looking up. The M3 Grant, the new American medium tank with its 75mm gun mounted low in the hull, is heavier, stronger, everything the Stuart isn't. But until they arrive, the light tanks must stand in the gap. At 0700, the first shapes appear through the haze, black silhouettes rolling out of the sun. Panzers, dozens of them. The German attack has found its mark. All cruise engines on Smith's voice cuts through the radio net. Hold position until contact, then fall back by bounds. The Stuarts roar to life, engines screaming under strain. Dust billows around them like smoke from 1,000 chimneys. The men are quiet, focused. There's no bravado now, only the cold precision of experience. The first enemy shells arrive seconds later, slamming into the ridge ahead. Sand erupts in geysers. One tank to Smith's right takes a direct hit, its turret flipping skyward. No time to mourn. Fire short bursts, Smith commands. The 37mm gun cracks spitting tracers toward the approaching line. A Panzer lurches to a stop, smoke pouring from its rear deck. Another veers off tracks, shredded. But for every one that burns, 3 more keep coming. Fall back 10 yards, Smith orders. Wallace reverse slow. The driver obeys the Stuart, jerking backward as shells whistle past. Their speed, once mocked, is now their only armor. Overhead, the desert sky rumbles. Twin-engined Boston bombers of the Desert Air Force dive in, releasing strings of bombs along the German line. Explosions ripple across the sand. For a moment, the tide hesitates. British gunners seize the chance, their 25-pounders hammering the flanks. But Rommel's veterans recover fast. He has seen airstrikes before, knows they cannot hold ground. Forward, he orders, watching through binoculars from his half-track. His voice is calm, almost cold. close with them, crush the crossroads. The panzers press on. At Knightsbridge, chaos reigns. Smoke blinds the gunners. Radios crackle with overlapping calls. We're flanked. Grid E4 needs support. Red 2 down. Crew bailing out of ammo withdrawing. The net dissolves into static and shouts. Smith's troop pulls back behind a low ridge, hulls half buried in sand. "Reload and get ready," he says, voice steady though his hands tremble. Peters jams another shell into the breech face streaked with grime. "If they come over that rise," he mutters, "we'll have to meet them muzzle first." They wait. Minutes feel like hours. Then the first German tank crests the ridge gun blazing. The shot misses by inches. Smith fires back. His round strikes the panzer's lower glacis. The explosion tears through its belly. Hit Peters shouts barely audible over the noise. Another panzer appears, and another. A burning tank slides down the slope, colliding with a second. The desert fills with thunder flame and the stench of cordite. It's not a battle anymore, it's survival. By noon, the 4th Royal Tank Regiment has been reduced to scattered pockets. The Grants arrive at last, heavy guns thundering, forcing the Germans to pause. British infantry retreat through the crossroads, firing as they fall back. Smith's Stuart track, damaged again, limps behind the line. The desert is a furnace. The heat inside the tank reaches unbearable levels. Sweat stings their eyes, metal scalds bare skin. Coolant's boiling. Wallace shouts, "Keep her running." Smith answers, "We stop, we die." They make it to a refueling post 2 miles north before the engine finally gives up. The Stuart wheezes, hisses, and dies. Smith slams his fist on the hatch rim. She's done. Peters climbs out, coughing. "Well, she got us here. That's something." They look back. The horizon to the south is on fire, black smoke columns marking the fall of Knightsbridge. The Desert Fox has broken through. Command orders a general withdrawal toward Tobruk. The men are exhausted, sunburned, half-deaf from shelling. Convoys of trucks and surviving armor snake north, under constant Luftwaffe attack. Smith rides on the back of a transport, his disabled Stuart left behind, half buried in sand. Watching it disappear in the distance feels like losing a friend. By nightfall, the 8th Army's line has fractured. Rommel's armored divisions sweep north, enveloping pockets of resistance. The British fallback turns chaotic. Vehicles lost in the dark units cut off radios silent. The Gazala line is gone. Yet even in defeat, lessons harden. The Stuart crews have learned how to fight, how to move, how to survive. Their light tanks, derided as toys, have become the eyes and nerves of an army in retreat. At a makeshift field headquarters near Akroma, General Nori delivers the bad news. "We'll have to abandon Tobruk if this continues." The officers murmur, faces pale. Rommel's advance is relentless, unstoppable, a force of nature. Smith listens quietly from the doorway, still smelling of oil and smoke. When the meeting ends, he turns to Peters. "You realize what this means, don't you?" Peters nods grimly. "The Fox owns the desert." "Not yet," Smith says softly. "Not while we're still breathing." He looks up at the stars above the darkened desert, cold, endless, indifferent. Somewhere out there, Rommel's tanks are still moving their engines, humming in the night. But so are his men. And the war, like the sand itself, is far from settled. June 1942, Libya. June burns across the desert like a torch. The sun hangs high and cruel, the air thick with dust and defeat. The British 8th Army is in retreat lines shattered by the Gazala disaster. Convoys snake north, columns of men trudging between crippled trucks, eyes hollow from exhaustion. Every engine groans, every tread marks desperation. Somewhere in the endless haze ahead lies Tobruk, once a fortress, now the last hope. Lieutenant Harold H. Smith rides in the back of a Bedford truck, gripping his helmet as it rattles over the stones. His old Stuart tank lies abandoned miles behind, swallowed by the sand near Akroma. The loss stings like a missing limb. For months that machine had been his home, his shield, his weapon. Now without it, he feels naked. Peters sits beside him, silent. His face is gaunt lips, cracked from heat. "We'll make Tobruk by night," he mutters, "if it still holds." Smith doesn't answer. He knows the truth. Tobruk is already under siege again. Rommel's panzers have swept north faster than anyone thought possible. By late afternoon, they crest a ridge and see it the harbor city shimmering in the distance, ringed by smoke. Anti-aircraft bursts dot the sky as Ju-87 Stukas dive screaming toward the docks. British and South African gunners fire back. They reach the outskirts by dusk, the roads choked with vehicles. Mechanics, infantrymen, medics, all in motion, all trying to hold the line. The chaos is thick enough to taste burnt oil, sweat, cordite, and fear. A dispatch officer runs past, shouting over the din. All available armor to the southern perimeter. Rommel's through. Eladem Smith grabs his arm. "Where's the 4th RTR? "Scattered," the officer gasps. "You'll find fragments near the old airstrip." "Go." They sprint through the maze of wrecks and sandbagged positions until they find them. Half a dozen surviving Stuarts, their paint blistered, their crews black with soot. Sergeant Miles salutes with a grease-stained hand. "Smith thought you were gone." "Almost," was Smith replies. "What's the situation?" "Not good. Rommel's coming in hard from the desert. Orders are to delay him until dawn." Smith nods. "Then let's get to it." They mount up. Smith climbs into the gunner's seat of a loned Stuart, older, rougher, but familiar. By midnight, the desert south of Tobruk glows with fire. The Stuarts prowl the dunes, engines whining as they weave between craters. Their small guns flash again and again, firing at shapes moving in the dark, half-seen silhouettes of panzers and armored cars. "Left flank. 3 o'clock," Peters yells. Smith swings the turret. A German half-track bursts from the shadows, machine gun blazing. He fires. The first shell hits low, the second catches it square. The vehicle explodes, scattering debris. Target down. For a few minutes they hold. Then the radio crackles with a voice nearly drowned by static. "All units, fall back to the inner line." The perimeter is breached. The withdrawal turns into a rout. German tanks pour through the gap, headlights off, moving like shadows. The British defenders break under the pressure. Tobruk, the fortress that had held for 8 months in 1941, is collapsing in a single night. Smith's Stuart races through the burning outskirts. Buildings collapse, fuel depots explode, the harbor itself aflame. Ships at anchor burn where they float, their masts glowing like matchsticks. The air smells of salt and death. "Orders," Sir Peters shouts. The radio offers nothing but chaos, panic, static. "We head north," Smith decides. They pass convoys of wounded vehicles, medics waving them through. Somewhere in the confusion, an ammunition dump detonates, lighting the sky. They burst through the smoke and find themselves at the edge of the city. Ahead, the open desert glows faintly under the moon, the road to Egypt. By dawn, it's over. The British garrison surrenders. 33,000 men march into captivity. Rommel rides into the city at noon. Berlin calls him Der Löwe von Afrika, the Lion of Africa. From the air, Tobruk looks like the carcass of some enormous beast, ribs of concrete, veins of smoke, and a heart still burning. On the coastal road east, Smith's surviving troop limps toward the frontier, their tanks' battered fuel nearly gone. "Feels like we lost everything," Peters says. Smith looks back once the smoke rising behind them. "Not everything," he says. "We're still alive. And we've learned. The war, after all, is shifting. New machines are coming. New tactics. In Cairo, British and American officers are already planning the counterstrike. Rommel may hold the desert today, but in the long game, the one measured in factories and fuel drums, the tide is beginning to turn. Smith wipes the dust from his goggles and stares east. Next time he murmurs, "We'll be ready." July 1942. Mersa Matruh. The desert beyond Tobruk is scorched and silent, the color of old bone. In its emptiness, only the wind speaks, carrying with it the distant hum of engines and the crackle of retreating columns. The Eighth Army is falling back once more, battered, bloodied, but not destroyed. Its rear guard, what remains of the 4th Royal Tank Regiment among them, now gathers near Mersa Matruh, the last defensive outpost before Egypt. Lieutenant Harold H. Smith steps down from the back of a supply lorry boots sinking into the sand. The camp sprawls across the dunes, tents flapping in the hot wind, trucks idling, the constant clatter of tools as mechanics labor over wrecked tanks. The air smells of diesel salt and fatigue. For the first time in weeks, he sees something new: lines of freshly painted American tanks glinting in the sun. They're not Stuarts, at least not only Stuarts. Taller hulls, broader guns, cleaner silhouettes. On their sides, fresh white stars blaze. Peters whistles low. Well, would you look at that? They've brought the big brothers. The newcomer waves are M3 Grants and their American variant, the M3 Lees. Heavier tanks with 75mm guns mounted in their hulls and a smaller 37mm turret above. Awkward but powerful, they represent a new doctrine taking shape. Alongside them sit rows of brand-new Stuarts, the improved M3A1 model, with a welded hull and no commander's cupola. Sleek, fast, deadly in the right hands. An American officer approaches Captain Raymond Ray Cutter, 2nd Armored Division. Tall, sunburned, with a drawl that softens the desert's edge. "You the Brits from 4th Royal," Smith nods. "What's left of us?" Cutter grins. "Well, partner, the cavalry's here. These babies just rolled off the docks at Alexandria. Brand new, tuned and hungry. Guess Uncle Sam finally brought the toys for everyone." The crews laugh, tired laughter, but real. For the first time since Gazala, hope feels tangible. That night, under canvas, lit by hurricane lamps, British and American officers gather around maps. The mood is sober but determined. Major General William Gott outlines the new defensive plan. Rommel's heading for El Alamein. That's our last stop before the Nile. Captain Cutter leans in. "What's our play? Hit and run. The Stuarts will scout and harass his flanks fast, hard, constant." The meeting disperses with quiet nods. No speeches, no cheers. Just the weary understanding of men who have seen too much. At dawn, the new tanks roll out across the plain, British crews in fresh machines, American crews beside them. The sound of hundreds of radial engines fills the air like a swarm of mechanical bees. The formation stretches for miles, dust rising in gold clouds. Smith sits in his new Stuart, running a hand over the smooth welds of its turret. "Feels strange," he says. "Like stepping into someone else's skin." Peters checks the gun sight. She's quicker on traverse. Smooth recoil, too. Feels right. They drive west, the desert wind whipping through open hatches. The landscape is littered with reminders of defeat, burned trucks, and wrecked Crusaders. Yet amid ruin, the army moves with renewed purpose. By midday, they reach forward reconnaissance positions near Mersa Matruh. Rommel, meanwhile, pushes relentlessly east. His tanks, worn and low on fuel, advance like phantoms through the desert. At his headquarters near Sidi Rezegh, Rommel studies maps under the glow of an oil lamp. "New American models, sir," reports his adjutant. Rommel's expression hardens. "Then they'll die faster, too." He stubs out his cigarette. "We strike again at dawn." The next morning, the storm breaks. At 0630, columns of panzers push east. The 4th Royal Tank Regiment forms the forward screen. Smith's troop spots them first, black dots growing larger through the shimmering heat. "Contact, bearing 240, Peters calls. The Stuarts fan out, using the ridgelines for cover. The new models move smoother, faster. When they crest the dunes, their 37mm guns open fire. It's the same deadly dance, but this time the rhythm feels different. The British tanks don't stand and fight. They sting, then vanish. By noon, Rommel's spearhead slows. His forward units report fuel shortages. For the first time in months, the Desert Fox is being harried. At the edge of the battlefield, Smith's troop pulls back to rearm. Peters grins. "We're not running anymore." Smith nods. "No. We're learning." That night, the radio hums with cautious optimism. Mersa Matruh still stands. The 8th Army has bent but not broken. The Americans are coming in strength. The tide is turning. Smith leans against his tank and stares west. The fox has run hard and far, but every predator runs out of desert eventually. July 1942. El Alamein. Dawn breaks over the Qattara Depression like a blade of white fire. Heat already shimmers off the dunes. The British 8th Army, battered, rebuilding, breathing hard, has fallen back as far as it can. Behind them lies Alexandria, the Nile Delta, and Cairo itself. There is nowhere left to retreat. The new defensive position stretches from the Mediterranean coast southward to the impassable salt marshes of the Qattara Depression. It's here at a railway halt called El Alamein that the British have chosen to stand. Lieutenant Harold H. Smith wakes to the sound of aircraft engines droning above. He pushes out of his tent flap to see squadrons of Kitty Hawks and Bostons flying eastward in formation air cover for the morning. Around him, the camp stirs to life. Mechanics crawl over tanks, drivers check tracks, gunners clean barrels blackened from yesterday's skirmishes. The 4th Royal Tank Regiment now forms part of the 7th Armored Brigade under Major General Gott. Their machines are mostly M3 Stuarts, newer and faster. Peters tosses a tin mug of bitter coffee his way. "Morning, sir. They say Rommel's close, maybe 15 miles out." Smith takes a sip, grimacing. Then the fox has run out of desert. He looks toward the west. The horizon is alive with haze and motion. Rommel is coming again, his panzers cutting across the open desert in the same wide hook that has broken so many lines before. But this time the British are ready. The defenses at El Alamein are unlike anything seen before in North Africa. Behind each minefield lie gun pits, trenches, and fallback positions. The 8th Army, under new leadership from General Claude Auchinleck, has learned Rommel's rhythm and plans to break it. At 0700, the first shells fall. The German artillery opens the battle with a rolling barrage. British 25-pounders answer instantly, thunder echoing for miles. Smith climbs into his Stuart headset, crackling. All cruise engines on. Wait for my mark, we move on my signal. The familiar whine fills the turret, the Continental engine purring like a caged beast. Peters checks the sight alignment, his hands steady. "Feels different this time," he says. "It is," Smith replies. "We're not running anymore." The first German tanks appear through the haze, Panzer III's and I-4's hulls, glinting in the sun. They advance in disciplined lines, guns firing methodically. But before they close to range, British defense erupts. From concealed gun pits, 6-pounders and 25-pounders tear into the German columns. Smith gives the order, "Go all Stuarts, advance and harass, hit their flanks fast and close." The Stuarts leap forward, engines screaming. They move like schools of fish, darting in and out between dunes. Their small guns flash, sending 37mm shells skimming into Panzer sides. To the north, RAF Kitty Hawks swoop low, strafing the German columns. Explosions bloom across the plain, sand erupting like water. Rommel, observing from a ridge, lowers his binoculars. "They're fighting smarter," he mutters. "They've learned." By midday, the battle is a furnace. Smith's troop darts between wrecks, firing and falling back. Each maneuver buys minutes, each withdrawal more artillery fire. "Keep moving," Smith orders. "We're not here to win, just to bleed them." By late afternoon, Rommel's offensive has stalled. His left flank bogs down. His right is pinned under British artillery. Fuel trucks run dry. Smith's Stuart limps back to resupply, engine coughing. Mechanics rush forward with jerry cans and water tins. The desert is strewn with wrecks. Peters joins him, handing over a canteen. "We stopped him," he says simply. Smith nods. For today. That night, under a sky crowded with stars, the men rest beside their tanks. Somewhere to the west, German flares rise, marking evacuation routes. At headquarters, Auchinleck drafts his communiqué. The enemy attack at El Alamein has been brought to a standstill. This is the turning of the tide. Word spreads through the ranks like a whisper. The men call it the line in the sand, the point where the running stops. Smith lies awake atop his tank, looking toward the dark horizon where the enemy waits. The desert is quiet now, only the wind moving. He can almost hear the faint ticking of cooling engines, the heartbeat of machines that carried them through fire and back again. The toy tank has grown up. August 1942. The Alamein box. The desert has gone quiet again. After the thunder of July-August arrives like the pause between heartbeats. The guns fall silent. The smoke clears and both armies stare at each other across 70 miles of shimmering emptiness. Between them lies the no-man's land of El Alamein, a landscape of broken vehicles, half-buried corpses, and twisted tank skeletons. Lieutenant Harold H. Smith leans against the track of his M3 Stuart, reading by the pale light of a hurricane lamp. The desert night is cool now, and the sound of wind through the dunes is steady as breath. Around him, men speak softly or not at all. Feels strange, doesn't it? Peters murmurs, handing over a mug of lukewarm tea. After Tobruk, I thought we'd never get a quiet night again. Smith takes a sip, eyes still on his notebook. Quiet just means Rommel's planning something. Always is, Peters replies. Rommel is trapped, but not beaten. His supply lines run thin, yet he still holds the western desert like a wounded animal guarding its den. Reports tell of German tanks dug into hull-down positions west of Ruwaisat Ridge 88s, waiting for any movement east. The British do the same. Both sides dig refit and wait. In Cairo, a new commander takes over General Bernard Law Montgomery. Precise, demanding, confident to the point of arrogance. The men haven't met him, but word spreads fast. He's the one who'll stop the retreat. Montgomery, Peters says one night. Sounds like the kind of bloke who irons his socks. Smith smirks. If he stops us running, I'll polish his boots. Under Montgomery, everything changes. Inspections are ruthless. Supplies flow like never before, convoys bringing spares, fuel, and new American gear. The Stuarts get new filters, radios, fresh ammunition. Mechanics work in shifts, stripping down engines in open air, sand grinding between every gear. The men grumble, but they can feel it. The army is being rebuilt from the inside out. By mid-August, training begins anew. The Stuarts practice flanking drills with Grants and the new M4 Shermans arriving from the States. Fire and movement speed, coordination, precision. The desert becomes their proving ground. Every dawn, columns of armor roll out engines, howling guns, firing at marked targets. It feels less like chaos now, more like choreography, the war evolving into something disciplined. During one exercise, Smith's troop sweeps wide across a ridge. Keep spacing, target mock-up panzers at 11 o'clock. The Stuarts pivot as one, their guns flashing in sunlight. When it's over, an American instructor grins. That's how cavalry fights in the 20th century. That night, the camp buzzes with energy. Soldiers gather around fires, swapping cigarettes and stories. Someone starts a harmonica. Smith sits beside his tank, staring into the flames. Feels different, he says quietly. Almost like we know what we're doing now. Peters nods. Maybe we finally do. The days crawl forward hotter than the last. The men dig into their positions, fortifying the Alamein box. A fortress made of sand and steel, born from every defeat they've endured. Across the line, Rommel feels the weight of time pressing down. His troops are exhausted, his tanks worn thin. Fuel rations cut his mobility to a crawl. The Afrika Korps is starving in slow motion. In his HQ near Tel El Isa, Rommel writes to his wife, "The enemy is strong, but I believe we can still win through will. Yet I feel the strain." He folds the letter carefully, knowing it may never reach her. By late August, the intelligence war intensifies. British intercepts reveal Rommel's plan one last gamble before his supplies collapse. The date, August 30th. At 0200 that night, faint lights appear German columns moving east under cover of darkness. The Fox tries his old trick again. Smith wakes to engines in the distance. They're moving, Peters says. Then so are we. Orders crackle, hold the line at Alam el Halfa Ridge. Engines roar to life. The Stuarts of the 4th Royal roll out under starlight dust, trailing like ghostly banners. Ahead, the ridge rises, the key to the battlefield. If it falls, so does El Alamein. We've trained for this, Smith says. Now we show the Fox what toys can do. The radio crackles with confirmation. Rommel's last offensive has begun. The waiting is over. August 31st, 1942. The desert burns. Night fades in the desert, not with color, but with heat. The stars dissolve into gray as the sun climbs past 90 degrees. Engines roar in every direction as Rommel's armor rolls east the Desert Fox, making one last gamble to break the British line. At Alam el Halfa Ridge, the 4th Royal Tank Regiment waits. Lieutenant Harold H. Smith stands in his turret scanning the horizon. Behind him, a line of Stuarts, Grants, and Shermans crouch in ambush. Every man knows if the ridge falls, so does Egypt. Movement bearing 215, Peters says. Through the haze, dark shapes glide across the sand. Panzers, dozens of them. Smith radios, contact. All units hold fire until my mark. The trap is set, Montgomery's plan to bleed the Fox dry. At 0630, the first shells scream in. The ground shakes. Sand sprays over the tanks. All hatches down, keep positions. The bombardment lasts 10 minutes. Then through the haze, the panzers advance, driving into minefields deeper than any map suggests. Range 800, Peters calls. Fire, the 37mm gun bucks. A panzer erupts in flame. Good hit, target the next one. The ridge explodes in light and thunder. British and German shells trade in rhythm. The Stuarts dart between Grants, firing and shifting. Enemy turning south comes over the radio. They're walking right into it. Moments later, the minefield detonates in rolling bursts. German tanks vanish in flame tracks, sheared hulls torn open. Rommel shouts, "We must push through." But fuel is gone, artillery relentless. By midday, the air vibrates with engines and aircraft. RAF Kitty Hawks dive through smoke bombing the stalled German columns. Each explosion sends black fountains of sand skyward. The Afrika Korps radios break with pleas. We're hit, need fuel, anti-air, cover gone. Smith's troop pushes forward. Keep them moving. Don't let them regroup. The Stuarts dart through fire-hunting fuel trucks and half-tracks. Peters reloads, sweat streaming. Feels like payback, doesn't it? It's not payback, Smith says coldly. It's the end of running. By late afternoon, the desert floor is a graveyard. German vehicles burn in black lines. Wrecked panzers lie half-buried in sand. The radio crackles with Montgomery's calm voice. Hold position. Do not pursue. The enemy is finished for the day. Smith lowers his headset. Around him, men cheer the first true victory. At dusk, the desert glows red, the wind carrying fine grains of sand. Do you think that's it? Peters asks. Not yet, Smith says. The Fox is wounded, not dead. In the distance, a single German half-track limps west. The sight feels symbolic, the desert finally turning on its master. That night, the 8th Army holds Alam el Halfa Ridge. In Cairo, Montgomery reports enemy withdrawing. Morale high. Churchill reads it and smiles. Now we have a general and an army that will not be pushed. Across the desert, Rommel sits under a lantern, exhausted. We have no choice, he murmurs. We go back. The retreat begins. For the 4th Royal Tank Regiment, dawn brings silence. The victory feels heavy, earned through endurance rather than triumph. Smith walks among wrecks, brushing his hand over burned steel. So this is how it ends, he says. Not with a charge, but with a stand. Behind him, the Stuarts rest in a neat line, scorched but alive symbols of a new kind of warfare. Not toys anymore. Tools of discipline, precision, and will. The desert wind sighs through them, and for the first time in a year, it sounds like change. October 1942. The Second Battle of El Alamein. The desert waits. 2 months pass in silence, broken only by wind and machinery. Both armies dig in, divided by mined earth. Between them lie the bones of panzers and Stuarts, silent witnesses to a year of war. Yet something has shifted. By late October, the 8th Army stands reborn. Endless convoys bring men, tanks, and ammunition. The great buildup has begun. New M4 Shermans roll beside Grants and Stuarts. For once, they have more than courage to fight with. Smith watches as engineers mark paths through the minefields. The camp hums with purpose. Montgomery's precision defines everything. Orders came down, Peters says. Operation Lightfoot. We move tomorrow night. Lightfoot, Smith asks. They say the infantry will walk through the mines so the tanks can follow. Lightfoot Peters grins. Smith frowns. Let's hope it's not a joke. October 23rd, 1942. 2130 hours. The desert night is cool. Then the horizon flashes white. The largest barrage in North Africa begins. 900 guns fire in unison. The ground shakes. Shells streak overhead, bursting across the German line. Inside the tanks, crews sit silent. The noise is beyond sound, a physical force pressing against their chests. Smith checks his watch. 2 hours. Then we move. At 23:30, Montgomery's voice crackles. Lightfoot Phase 1 advance. Engines ignite. The 4th Royal Tank Regiment rolls forward through narrow minefield lanes, the glow of flares lighting their path. The Stuarts lead light and fast, guiding the Shermans behind them. Keep to the track, Smith warns. Stray off and we're done. Feels like we're driving into hell, Peters mutters. Hell's the other direction, Smith replies. By dawn, the smoke thickens. The German line holds. Rommel's 88s tear into advancing armor. Tank after tank burns in the rising sun. Smith's troop pushes through chaos. 3 o'clock, Peters shouts. A Panzer IV looms. Traverse left fire. The 37mm shell hits true. The Panzer bursts into flame. Hit Peters cheers. Stay sharp, Smith warns. There'll be more. Dust cloaks the sun. The air smells of oil and cordite. Amid the confusion, Smith realizes they're advancing, not retreating. For the first time, the 8th Army moves forward and doesn't stop. Rommel's lines buckle, his fuel gone, his legend trapped. British guns pound Tel El Akakir. Every blast drives the Germans west. The Afrika Korps is running on fumes. At dusk, Smith's troop refuels. Feels like we've fought a year in one day, Peters says. Maybe it's all been leading to this, Smith answers. The next morning brings the breaking point. British armor surges forward. The air fills with bombers, the ground with thunder. When the assault hits, the German line shatters. Rommel's army begins its retreat. At 1100 on November 4th, Montgomery sends a single word: victory. Cheers erupt across the desert. Smith sits quietly staring west. It's over, Peters says. No, Smith replies. Just our turn to move forward. All around, engines rumble, flags unfurl. The desert that once swallowed them now carries the sound of triumph. Abandoned German tanks stretch to the horizon. The Fox has fled. As the sun sets, the Stuarts stand in formation, their silhouettes against crimson sky. Smith rests a hand on the turret. You did good. For the men who fought here, the desert is no longer just sand. It's memory, forged in fire and endurance. Across the world, headlines will read, "Victory at El Alamein." But for those who lived it, the sound that lingers isn't cheering. It's the hum of engines cooling under the stars, the whisper of wind over sand singing the end of an era. The toy tank had found its war and won it.